Among the stories that drift like smoke from the cooking fires in Phitsanulok, there are some meant only for the local ear. This one comes from that province in lower northern Thailand, a place where the horizon is a flat, unbroken line, and the nights possess a darkness so complete it feels like a physical weight. Here, the modern world is a distant hum, and life is governed by the planting season and the coming of the rains. The old tales aren't entertainment, they're part of the landscape, quiet warnings etched into the very soil. If you believe these accounts deserve to be heard, a simple like on this video helps us to continue bringing them into the light. The story belongs to a young American named Leo who felt his life in the States had become a series of predictable right-angle turns on a city grid. He yearned for something organic, something that grew instead of being built. He wanted, as he put it, to get lost somewhere real. A short-term contract teaching English at a small government school seemed like the perfect escape. The placement agency, with a shrug, found him a rental on the far edge of a village that was little more than a knot of houses tied together by a single paved road. For Leo, the house was a dream. An old, dark wood structure on tall stilts, its wide veranda offering an uninterrupted view over a rippling sea of rice paddies. The green expanse stretched out to a hazy, tree-dusted horizon, a landscape that seemed to breathe with a life of its own. During the day, the oppressive heat was a physical presence, a heavy blanket that muffled sound and slowed time to a crawl. His life fell into a simple, repetitive, and deeply peaceful rhythm. He woke to the crowing of his neighbors' roosters, taught his classes of smiling, uniformed children whose curiosity was a balm, and spent his evenings on the veranda, watching the sun bleed out behind the distant hills, a spectacle of orange and purple that made him feel small and insignificant in the best possible way. For the first
month, it was a profound idyll. He felt the city-frayed knots in his shoulders begin to loosen. He learned the names of the shopkeepers, the subtle dip of the head that passed for a greeting, and the sublime joy of a cold, sweating bottle of beer as the evening cicadas began their deafening electric chorus. It was in the second month, as the rainy season began,
to threaten that he first saw the light. He was sitting out late, enjoying a rare, cool breeze that was rolling in across the paddies, carrying the scent of damp earth and vegetation. It was a moonless night, the kind of absolute rural dark that erases the world and allows the stars to shine with a fierce, impossible brilliance. And against that velvet blackness, he saw it, a single point of reddish light, far
out over the fields. It bobbed gently, like a lantern on a small fishing boat. But he knew there was no river out there, only an endless checkerboard of flooded paddies. He watched it for several minutes, his curiosity piqued. It drifted left, then right, with a slow, almost lazy rhythm. He ran through the rational explanations. A drone, of course. Maybe one of the more tech-savvy farmers checking their irrigation systems overnight. Or perhaps just someone walking the dikes with a headlamp. It was odd, but not unsettling. An anomaly in his peaceful new world. He finished his beer, went inside, and thought nothing more of it. He saw it again 3 nights later. This time it was closer. Close enough that he could discern its character. It wasn't the steady, focused beam of a flashlight. It was a soft, pulsating glow, a dull cherry red that seemed to swell and then dim with a slow, organic beat, like a heart seen through a veil of skin. And its movement was deeply wrong. It would hang motionless for a minute at a time, a single red ember in the vast dark, then dart sideways with a slick, unnatural speed before resuming its gentle, swaying drift. He felt the first real prickle of unease, the kind that starts in the gut. He leaned forward on the railing, squinting, when he became aware of the silence. The village dogs, the soy dogs as they were called, were a constant chaotic feature of the night. A roaming, barking, squabbling pack that provided a non-stop soundtrack to his evenings. But now, they were utterly silent. All of them. The entire village, which was usually alive with their territorial calls, had fallen into a dead, listening hush. It was a silence that felt heavier than any sound. And then a new noise reached him. From the house next door, from his neighbor's chicken coop, came a frantic, muffled fluttering. The dry, percussive sound of panicked birds beating their wings against wood and wire. The light in the field seemed to pulse, little brighter, its rhythm quickening. Then, as if it had sensed his attention, it retreated, drifting rapidly back into the immense darkness until it was gone. The moment it vanished, the dogs erupted, a sudden explosive chain reaction of barking that made him jump. The next day, he tried to ask about it. He stopped by the small village store to buy bottled water and struck up a casual conversation with the owner, a woman named Molly. He asked if farmers use drones at night. She gave him a tight, polite smile that didn't reach her eyes and said the fields are best left to themselves after dark. He tried to press, describing the strange red light, the way it moved. Her smile vanished completely. She turned away, busying herself arranging dusty bottles on a shelf, her back to him. "Some lights are not for you," she said, her voice flat. The conversation was clearly and chillingly over. That night, a creeping paranoia began to set in. He sat on his veranda but found no peace, only a constant need to scan the dark horizon, waiting. The familiar, comforting sounds of the village night now seemed to hold a new, menacing quality. Every rustle in the grass, every distant call made him flinch. Around midnight, he saw it again. It rose from the same distant part of the field, a familiar red heartbeat in the dark. A knot of pure dread tightened in his stomach. He retreated inside, locking the heavy wooden door and closing the shutters over his windows, feeling foolish but unable to shake the primal feeling of being watched, of being exposed. He lay in bed, the thin mattress doing little comfort him, and just listened. He heard the chorus of dogs taper off into that same expectant silence. He heard the frantic clucking and fluttering begin next door. And then he heard something else. A faint,
wet, scratching sound. It was coming from directly beneath his house, from the dark, earthy space between the wooden stilts. It was a dragging, scraping noise, like something heavy and damp being pulled laboriously through the dirt and dry leaves under his floorboards. He held his breath, his heart hammering against his ribs so hard he could feel the bed frame vibrate. The sound continued for a minute, a slow, methodical exploration of the space beneath his home, before it faded away towards the back of his property. He didn't sleep for the rest of the night. His mind raced, desperately trying to build a cage of logic around the fear. A monitor lizard, a large python, a stray water buffalo, but none of it fit. None of it explained the light, or the silence of the dogs, or the cold, intelligent malevolence he felt radiating from the dark. His focus shifted to an old woman who lived by herself 2 houses down. During the day, she was a fixture of the village, a tiny, frail woman named Yai, who always offered him a gentle, toothless smile. She spent her days tending a small, miraculously lush vegetable patch behind her simple shack. But Leo realized with a jolt that he never ever saw her after sunset. Her home was always dark, her door shut tight long before the other villagers retired. There were whispers about her, he now recalled, snatches of conversations in Thai that would abruptly stop when he approached. Quiet looks exchanged between other villagers when she shuffled past. At the time, he dismissed it as the kind of small-town gossip that orbits the lonely and the elderly. Now he wasn't so sure. A week passed without incident. The light did not appear. The nights were filled with the normal, reassuring chorus of dogs and insects. Leo began to relax, chiding himself for his overactive imagination, blaming the isolation. He started to feel normal again. That was his mistake. One evening, he was at his sink washing dishes when the power went out, plunging the entire village into that profound, ink-black darkness. It wasn't uncommon during the rainy season, but it was always jarring. He lit a few candles, their small flames casting dancing, monstrous, writhing shadows on the walls, and decided to sit on his veranda to wait for the electricity to return. The air was thick, still, and humid, and in the sudden, oppressive silence, he saw the light again. But this time, it wasn't a distant mystery. It was at the edge of his neighbor's property, hovering just beyond their fence line, no more than 50 yards away. It was a deep, angry red, and it pulsed with a sickening, living rhythm. The neighbors' chickens were going insane, a storm of terrified noise from their coop. Leo was frozen, half hidden in the shadows of his porch, his body gone cold. He could feel the absolute stillness of the rest of the village. Everyone was inside, every door was shut, everyone knew. He watched, unable to look away, as the light floated over the fence. It moved with a terrifying, silent grace. It drifted directly over to the chicken coop and hovered there, its red glow illuminating the wire mesh in hellish detail. He heard the sharp crack of splintering wood, followed by a single choked squawk that was cut off with sickening abruptness. Then a series of wet, tearing, feasting noises that made his stomach heave. The light rose from the coop, glowing
brighter now, seeming engorged and satisfied, and it turned. It turned slowly, deliberately, to face his house. His blood turned to ice water in his veins. It wasn't just a light. The faint starlight, combined with its own internal luminescence, was just enough to reveal the shape it emanated from. His mind simply refused for a second to accept what he was seeing. It was a head, the head of a woman with long,
stringy, dark hair that floated around it like a morbid halo in water. And below the severed neck, where a body should have been, there was only a dangling, glistening mass of internal organs, a heart, lungs, and intestines, all trailing beneath her, pulsing with that soft, hellish red light. As it drifted closer to his property line, the faint light caught her.
features. It was Yai, the gentle old woman from down the lane. Her eyes were closed, her face serene, peaceful, as if she were in a deep, pleasant sleep. But she was floating, propelled by some unseen force, a living, breathing nightmare, drifting through the night air. Leo didn't scream. He couldn't. The sound was a hard knot of pure, undiluted horror trapped in his throat. He scrambled backwards, falling over
His own feet, crab walking away from the open doorway until his back hit the far wall of his house. He sat there in the dark, shaking uncontrollably, listening. He heard that same wet, dragging sound as it passed beneath his floorboards again, a sound he now understood to be the creature's organs scraping against the dirt. Then a profound silence fell once more. The power came back on an hour later with a sudden,
violent hum, but he didn't move from his spot on the floor until the first gray light of dawn crept through the shutters. The next morning, the world looked sickeningly, offensively normal. The sun was bright, the air was clean. He looked out his window and saw his neighbor, the man whose chickens had been attacked. He was quietly repairing the broken door of his coop, hammering a new piece of wood into place. He pulled the mangled, half-eaten carcass of a chicken out and tossed it onto a compost pile without ceremony. The man looked up, and his eyes met Leo's. There was no anger in his gaze, no confusion, just a deep, bottomless, weary resignation. A shared, unspoken knowledge. A few moments later, Yai emerged from her shack. She was carrying a small basket and shuffled over to her vegetable garden. She paused, looked over at Leo's house, and gave him the same gentle, toothless smile she always did. She raised a frail hand and waved. Leo felt a cold dread wash over him that was infinitely worse than the fear from the night before. This was the true horror. It wasn't the monster. It was the quiet, communal acceptance of it. They knew. They all knew. They lived with it. They tolerated it.
They made space for it in their lives. They repaired their chicken coops in the morning and smiled at the abomination that had visited them in the night. He was the outsider, the only one who saw it for what it was, the only one horrified. He packed a single bag, left everything else behind, and walked through the village to the main road to catch the first
bus heading to anywhere else. He never looked back, but he says the silence is what stays with him. The memory of an entire village holding its breath in the dark, waiting together for the light in the fields to pass.